first time a group of explorers has surveyed from the air and on foot one of the last totally unknown areas of the Canadian continent. 10,000 square miles of mountains and glaciers in the St Elias range, lying on the Canadian side of the boundary between Alaska and Canada. By railroad, they followed the route of the Klondike Gold Rush across the White Pass and along beautiful Lake Bennett to Carcross, a tiny settlement about 150 miles east of the mountains where they planned to establish their base camp. Taking off from this little town, they made a series of photographic flights in order to cover the whole unexplored area with a network of aerial photographs. The roughest and most savagely magnificent country they had ever seen stretched westward from Carcross to the great peaks forming the backbone of the range. Fantastic new mountains, ridges and pinnacles unfolded before them in such profusion they might almost have taken the country for the Himalayas of India. As one purpose of the aerial reconnaissance of this vast unknown area was to establish, if possible, a sledge route through the mountains to the Pacific Ocean, the surfaces of the glaciers had to be studied carefully to find out which were impassable and which would allow a sledge party to get through. After this preliminary work, they established their first base camp by airplane transport about 50 miles east of the international boundary on the lower glacier. Moving forward on foot and by dog teams, they pitched their second base camp at 5,000 feet, 25 miles further up, at the base of a huge ice cascade 500 feet high, shown on the right of this picture. To get around this barrier, they had to backpack their equipment up the drifted side of the glacier. The gradients were so steep, it was all the dogs could do to plunge up through the powdery snow without any load at all. The empty sledges had to be pulled up by hand line. Once over the barrier and above the ice cataracts on the smooth glacier again, terrific blizzards blocked their progress almost steadily. Night in the howling gale, blowing 50 or 60 miles an hour, was often a nightmare. The flapping and cracking of the tents in the wind sounded like machine gun fire, and the snow drifted so fast they could hardly keep the tents from being buried. When the weather cleared at last, the work of breaking the new trail began once more. Their time had been shortened by the continual storms, and the men as well as the dogs were forced to work at the sledges, moving supplies forward 10 to 15 miles a day, practically never resting. They reached their highest altitude, 8,100 feet, at the foot of a colossal unknown peak, over 14,000 feet high, a sheer 6,000-foot precipice, rising in Himalayan grandeur directly above them. Smooth snowfields now led westward toward the Alaskan boundary, allowing at last for fast sledging. Behind them rose Mount Hubbard, the vast Hubbard Glacier spreading out at its feet, a frozen mass which probably contains more snow and ice than all the glaciers in the Alps put together. After reaching the last divide, they sent the dogs back with their Indian driver, the remaining 4 of them pushing westward, hand-sledging the last 20 miles of the snow line, and then backpacking through a chaos of rocks and ice, which they called Hell's Half Mile, along the edge of the Nunatak Glacier. Finally, after 84 days on the ice, they reached their goal, thus completing the first successful crossing of some of the most magnificent mountain scenery to be found on the Canadian continent.